Most leaders don't even think about the fact that they continue to lose guests time after time. There's lots of talk about loyalty. There's lots of talk about different ways to get back to your guests. But we all know in the restaurant industry that keeping your guests coming back more often and ensuring that they have a fantastic experience is a huge piece of restaurant success. Today, we are joined by a restaurant technologist that has done quite a bit in the way of restaurant technology. And I'm excited for you guys to hear in the episode what Ryan Volberg has done. He's got a new product called Guestologie that really, in my opinion, is changing the way that we go about the guest experience, especially in casual dining related to loyalty. We talk about the real reason why 68% of guests leave the restaurant and don't come back based on staff not giving a hoot about them. The machine learning logarithms that continue to come out to help guests to feel like they're an important part of who you are and what you're doing, as well as some practical strategies on how every single restaurant, even without a tool like this, should be thinking about their guest engagement in 2026 and beyond. If you don't know me, my name is Jeremy Julian. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at CBS Northstar. We wrote the Northstar point of sale solution for multi-units. Please check us out at cbsnorthstar.com. And now on to the episode with Ryan Volberg and Guestologie. Welcome back to the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast. I thank everyone out there for joining us. As I like to say every single episode, you guys have got lots of choices. So thank you for hanging out today. Today, I am joined by a multiple-time founder, entrepreneur, guy who's got a million ideas, and it's been fun to get to know Ryan over the last little bit. Got to get a shout out to my friend Alan Heyman, who gave us the original intro. I don't know if you remember that, Ryan. That's where we got connected. But why don't you introduce yourself for those that maybe have been living under a rock and don't know who Ryan Volberg is, because you've been in the space for a week or two. It's at least if I look back at the bio.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I guess there's probably a lot of rocks because I'm not a household name, but I've had the pleasure of serving this industry for a long time. So, just in terms of introduction, I think, my first entry into this restaurant technology space that I know and love so much was with the creation of a company called VivoNet, which was founded in 1999. And our mission was to create the first cloud-based POS. And you have to remember that back in 1999, that terminology didn't exist. I don't know when cloud came out, but we called ourselves an application service provider, an ASP. I'm really dating myself. I think that's going to happen a lot on this podcast. And so, we were just trying to solve a simple problem, which is if I had 100 restaurants, I had 100 separate POS systems, and then I had to try to get all that data into one place. And then, God forbid, I needed to change prices because I had to change it in 100 different places. And so wouldn't it be nice if everything just was all in one place and we could get the reporting and change the prices and have an agile business? So we built that product. It was called Halo, and it was the first enterprise cloud-based point of sale system. And we caught the attention of Micros, and that's back to Alan Heyman. Alan Heyman was I think the head of sales over at Micros in those days, and Paul Armstrong was the CTO. And they saw what we were doing and they got interested, and they said, hey, we think this is the future of point of sale and we'd love to invest in your company. And so they did. Micros invested many millions of dollars into VivoNet. And we collaborated on a variety of products. A product called iPOS was our product, branded through and sold through Micros, and mymicros.net we influenced, and a whole variety of other things. So it was a tremendous education with them, and ultimately VivoNet went on to win some of the largest POS deals in our industry, most notably a 5,000 location deal with Sodexo, which was kind of interesting because inside of this one system, we had maybe an office building cafeteria that was doing $800 in sales a day, and then in the TD Gardens, the stadium, which during a hockey game would do $800,000 in an hour. And so it was a great education.
That's awesome. And I know that your tech space didn't stop there. I guess I know, post VivoNet, I think you left there. I guess talk a little bit more about your career, because I think it really culminates in what you're doing now. And I'm super excited to talk a little bit about that. But I think you had one or two stops beyond that, right?
Yeah, you bet. And so the next thing we did from there, that company got sold to private equity and then ultimately got bought by Infor. So I'm really proud of the fact that product still lives today and is serving thousands of customers. And I went on to be a co-founder of a company called Instant Financial, which was really the first company to do daily pay for hourly hospitality workers, and also a digital tips distribution. And so we actually had a real simple problem. And I think my career, I've always tried to be the white hat guy. Like we've always been on the side of the restaurant industry, right? And so we looked at the restaurant industry and said, look, there's two forces here. Force one is restaurants are chronically understaffed. Like they can't find and keep the workers they need to fully staff their restaurants. And the turnover is enormous. And there's a lot of costs with that. And over on the other side, you've got this payday loan industry, which is this predatory $85 billion industry that, honestly is taking advantage of these hourly workers who couldn't make it paycheck to paycheck. And we said, look, if we could provide a solution that restaurants could use to give their employees access to their earned pay, like they worked today and they could get part of it on the day they worked, it would ease a lot of financial. Like maybe it just needed $5 in gas money to come into work the next day or whatever it was, keep you out of the payday loan cycle. But the real, advantage was it would make the employer an employer of choice. If you were a restaurant chain or whomever, and you could offer that daily access to pay and your competitors couldn't, you would probably get more employees that wanted to come work with you and they would stay with you longer because they would get used to that advantage. And so that's what we were trying to do. And I think at Instant Financial, and to this day, we've taken the high ground, which is we would never monetize the employee. We never charge them for access to their own pay. Unfortunately, that's not the case with many of the companies that are in that space. But Instant has gone on to do very well. I had two co-founders in that business. And ultimately, when my first business sold from private equity to Infor, that was a time for me to take a step back and kind of reflect on what I wanted to do next. And so I stepped away from Instant Financial and I was trying to figure out what to do. I was going to take a long motorcycle trip from Vancouver to Key West, Florida, and actually was probably a month away from jumping onto the bike and going when I got a call from Savneet over at PAR and said, hey, we've got some grand plans for turning PAR around and, really getting that company to live up to its potential, but there's a lot of challenges. Would you be interested in coming and being part of the team and helping us turn PAR around? And I went down and looked around a bit at it, and I kind of fell in love with the opportunity. And so I spent the next 2.5 years of my career working with that team to really restore PAR back to its sort of leadership position in the industry that it historically had enjoyed. And, I'm proud of the fact that the day that I joined PAR, I think we had a $400 million market cap. And the day I left, it was $1.81 billion. So the whole team there did a tremendous job under Savneet's leadership. And that was just a great part of my career. And that's kind of where I stumbled into this, I guess, identity as a turnaround guy. Because the next thing you know, I was getting inbound requests, hey, could you come help us fix this company or fix that company? And so for the next few years, I did that. And I worked with a variety of different companies. And the last one was with a company in Florida called T-Rock, the Revenue Optimization Companies. And in a partnership with Google, we were working on really cool digital labor solutions for tier one retailers and tier one brands. And that was all based on Gemini and the Google Cloud stack. And that's where I really got a bit of an education on how to unlock business value from these, generative AI solutions. And that's when I was able to connect the dots into Guestologie, which had been a product I'd had in my mind for a long time. But up until this technology becoming available, I didn't really think there was any way to do it. And so that's brought me to Guestologie today. I've been incubating that on my own for a good part of 2026, and then jumped out, a little bit into 2025, and then really jumped in full time January 2026 to bring this company to market.
I love it, and I'm excited to talk about it. Funny enough, I don't know if Tal was one of your co-founders, but he was on the show back in 2024. Tal from Instant Financial, the acting CEO, and he was on in 2024. And I've had Savneet on the show twice, I think. So funny that some of your former coworkers have also been on the show. So for those listeners out there want to learn more about what they're doing at Brink and a little bit of what they're doing at Instant Financial, really cool episodes back in the archives. Let me know what your thoughts are on them. But Ryan, before we get any further, we're 8 minutes in. I love the background and the part that I wanted you to share is just there's so much technology influence that you've had. And while you might not necessarily be a household name for many, it was amazing to me when I got introduced to you just how much influence you've been able to have to truly help. And the thing that I love about our continued conversations is that you always put both the guest and the staff member, the restaurant owner, at the heart of the solutions that you're building, which is really kind of where I want to dig into Guestologie. So at a high level, what is Guestologie? Because I do think it's something unique in the space, and why I wanted to have you on the show is because I really, really find what you're doing as a innovative, different way to think about guest engagement and guest recovery and all of those kind of things. But why don't you give me, what's the elevator pitch on what Guestologie is?
Yeah, you bet. I'm gonna tell you a little story, a very brief story, because I love the problem. I'm obsessed with the problems. The technologies themselves are just sort of like the way you solve the problem. But in order to understand Guestologie, I'm going to give you an experience that I had that is repeated thousands of times every day throughout our industry. And it looks like this. My wife and I would go to dinner at a particular restaurant every Friday. It was our date night place. And we were emotionally attached to the place, right? It was our place. And it was a wonderful restaurant, but a lot of staff turnover, feel like every time we'd walk up a little bit, different host, maybe a lot of different servers, but that's okay. One day we go in and we sit down and server comes over and she's perfectly lovely and says, "Hi, my name's Joanne. I'm your server tonight. Welcome to restaurant. Is this your first time here?" And I just paused and I looked up. And I didn't say it this way to her, but I was like, "No, this is my 50th time here, 50." And I realized right at that moment that, the investment that we make in these restaurants is often sort of not returned to us.
Reciprocated. Yeah.
And yeah, that's the word. And it's not because the owners don't care. And it's not because, the ethos isn't there. It's just because it's so hard to recognize these guests as they're coming in. And so I went to the COO of that company and I said, here's what my experience is. And is this a problem for you that, you have staff and there's pretty high turnover and they just don't have the ability to recognize a 50-time guest from a first-time guest, from a 3-time guest and whatever it is. He goes, "Oh my goodness, it's a huge problem for us." I said, "Well, you know what? I think we could fix this." And so that was that was really what we set out to do, was to provide a system for restaurants that would help them create lasting and deep relationships directly with their guests. And so if we really look at what Guestologie does and what makes us unique from every other system out there is that, you can look at a variety of systems like OpenTable or a lot of loyalty systems out there. There's, customer data platforms, CDPs and marketing platforms and all these things. But mostly what they do happens after the guest has arrived. So OpenTable's job is to bring you a guest, right? I mean, they even bill you that way. We'll charge you a couple of dollars if we can bring you a guest. And after that, it's kind of done. And then a lot of loyalty programs will, once you've left the restaurant, you accumulate your points, and then they're marketing to you to try to get you to come back. But what nobody was doing was actually working with the guest while they're in the restaurant, right? To build an experience just for them. So hyper personalization, but I actually think there's a much bigger proposition here. And it's really contained in this one statistic. The National Restaurant Association published just a few months ago an article that said table service restaurants have 36% guest churn per year. So you got to just think about for a second. 36, 1/3 of our guests that are table service restaurant on average are just not coming back. And so obviously that begged a follow-up study. It's like, well, why is that? So they went out and we talked to those guests and said, "Well, you used to be loyal somewhere, but now you don't come back. How come?" Number one reason, 68% said due to staff indifference. And so what that means is that the staff, they can't recognize you. And frankly, a lot of times they just don't care. There's just this lack of connection. And so what's happened is the guests are going, they're starting to get comfortable at a place, but then very quickly that connection they're not being seen, they're not being connected with. And so what happens is they just go somewhere else. And so this is a new stat just out by Tilster, I think this week, saying 45% of diners have switched their favorite restaurant chain in the last year. 45.
Yeah, when you shared that with me the other day, I was like, "What? That's insane."
Right. So here's what the upshot is. We have never had more technology around loyalty, and we've never had less loyalty. So where does loyalty come from? I think loyalty is built in the dining room.
Yeah.
It's not built in an email and it's not built in a dashboard. It's built in the dining room when you are in my restaurant, and how I treat you says more than, some email offer for 25% off whatever it is down the road. And so that's what Guestologie is. It's a system that allows at scale the ability to recognize guests and to treat them personally to do one of two things. It's either to retain a high value guest or to grow more visitation from a high potential guest.
Yeah. Well, and I love, and I know we'll dig into this, Ryan, here in just a few minutes, the idea that you can do it digitally within the store while you're in that transaction. But I have two experiences, one on the negative side and one on the positive side. Our normal Friday night restaurant is in town. We go there almost every Friday night. My wife likes her margaritas on Friday night, and she's not here today, but she'd normally laugh down the hall and go, yes, I do like my Friday night margaritas at this little Mexican restaurant. And the owners are always really sweet, but they've had turnover in their staff. And the last two times we've been there, they didn't recognize us. They didn't have any idea who we were. And we literally are there 40 weeks a year, I would say 35 to 40 weeks a year. So it's been 5 years running. So and it was really disappointing the last two times going, why don't they recognize us? We missed a couple of weeks. It's graduation season right now, and lots going on. And so it was a very frustrating thing. On the flip side, there are certain places that we choose to go to because I know we've got the Cheers effect where you walk in and they know who you are when you walk in. Your drink might already be sitting there waiting for you. I was talking to a couple last night. They go to a different Mexican restaurant because they literally can do the order for their entire family of four because they're there all the time and they know who they are and they make sure that they get the right people. So I'm saying this all to say, I think we're all trying to figure this out. And I think everybody, it's not unique to the idea that says we want to treat guests the way that we would want to be treated. But now let's talk a little bit more about how you guys have figured out digitally how to figure out who that guest is, Ryan. Not the secret sauce per se, but how do we identify that without it being creepy? Because I've seen people go, we're going to have cameras and facial recognition saying Ryan Volberg's walking in. I don't even need the blocking and tackling, but talk to me a little bit about kind of what the guest experience is, because I think it was a very novel idea that you brought to me when you shared this product with me that says, we can digitally represent this guest in a way that you're going to drive them through the value chain the way you guys did. And I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about that without it coming off as, hey, we're Big Brother, watching over every single guest and know all of those things.
100%.
You heard people say that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Listen, I like to think of this from the perspective of I am the owner of a 20-table restaurant. Right? Like, so our customers right now are multi-location operators because we're really leaning into the enterprise side. But when I think of what our product is and who we're building it for, it's for that owner operator that's there. And we want to be able to scale that perspective. So when someone walks into the door of any restaurant, what would the owner want to know? Two things. Who is this guest to me? And what should I do about it? Right.
Yes.
And that is it. So if we talk about what Guestologie does, we're pulling data out of the existing systems at the restaurant. So this is, I think, a real important thing to say, which is restaurants are already burdened with a lot of technology. And what we don't want to do is like create another layer of it. So we're pulling data out of the reservation system or the table management system, which is really the system of record for visitation. And then we're combining that with POS data out of the POS. And we do a segmentation. And so we'll look back a couple of years if we can. And the idea is going back 2 years, we now have a complete picture of who the guests are, at least for that last 2 years, right? It's a pretty good picture. And so when a guest walks into a restaurant that's using our system, they say, hey, I'm here for my 7:00 reservation, or I'd like a table for 2, please. Once that data is entered into the say open table, the guest is marked as arrived, our system goes to work. So the first thing we do is we surface who this guest is. So what I mean by that is, what's the value of this guest? Okay, so it's the first thing that we should know. And so we do that. Our nomenclature is you could have an elite, a VIP, a loyal, a prospect, right? So these all sort of internal nomenclature. So the idea is Ryan walks up, I'm here for my 7:00 reservation, and our system says, who is Ryan? Oh, Ryan's an elite. Now, just to give you an example of how important this data is, an elite is somebody that usually makes up about 0.4% of all guests in a restaurant. And one elite,
0.4, less than 1%.
Less than 1%. And one elite is typically worth 100 regular guests in terms of customer lifetime value. So my proposition is this. If you're a restaurant operator, you sure as heck better be able to recognize an elite when they walk in. But there's a problem. There's more of them than you think. So for a pretty medium to large scale, casual dining restaurant, you might have 200 elites. And so even your best managers are not able to probably recognize more than 60 to 70 people at site. And so
And that's with
what's
zero
happening?
turnover. And that's with zero
Right,
turnover, right?
exactly,
We just talked
exactly.
about the turnover topic.
So I think this is an example of why this problem is so pernicious, is because humans actually can't do it. There's too many people, but it actually gets worse. Our next segment down we call the VIPs. And these are people that are coming between 6 to 10 times a year. They're quite loyal to us. There could be 1,000 to 800 of them. So they're invisible. Most of them are invisible. And so what our system is doing now is when someone walks into the door and says, I'm here for my 7 o'clock reservation, the first thing we do is we say, what is the value of this person to us? We're like, this is an elite or it's a VIP. Great. The second thing we do, though, is I think where the magic starts to unlock. And that is, I think a lot of the problem with segmentation is we treat all elites the same, or we treat all VIPs, all segments the same. We don't do that. We do what we call a loyalty trend assessment. So what our system is doing is it's looking in and saying, okay, Ryan's an elite. That's nice. But what's his relationship with our brand? Is he gaining in loyalty? He's starting to come more and more? Is he stable? Or in this case, is he starting to decline, which is where this churn comes from, right across all segments. So now Ryan's walked in, he hasn't even been seated at his table yet. And Guestologie has provided you with these two very important points to answer that question, who is Ryan? And it's this, Ryan's an elite and we're starting to see less of him. So automatically at this point, you have an advantage, right?
Yeah.
So there's a second thing we do. So that's the who is Ryan equation. The second piece of it is what should we do about it? So everyone talks about the sexiness of AI and all that, and actually also the criticisms of AI and all of those things are warranted. But really at the root of our system is machine learning, because what our system is doing is looking at patterns and getting really, really intelligent about how to make decisions for these guests. And so what we do as the third piece of this is we now build a playbook just for Ryan. So we know Ryan's a high value guest. We know that we've been seeing a little bit less of him. And so Ryan's here sitting in our waiting room and we're about to seat him. How should we approach Ryan? And really there are two main strategies, right? Strategy one is we want to retain a high value guest. That's it. And especially if they're like a very, very high value, like someone who's ultra regular, a VIP or an elite, it's actually obnoxious to try to get more visits from them. Right. And I think that's the problem with a lot of these email campaigns that are sort of brute force going out is this like, guys, you already got me. This is not relevant. So the first thing that we're trying to do there is either retain a high value guest or get more visitation from a high potential guest. So this is where our system goes to work and it builds that playbook. So if we rewind now, we know that Ryan's a high value guest. We understand that we're starting to see a little bit less. Maybe he's getting bored, right? And so we build a playbook for Ryan, and maybe that playbook is surprise and delight. Or maybe we're going to do something like we're going to recognize his status. Or maybe it's just our everyday best because we don't have to do something special every time. But the idea now is behind the scenes, we have a playbook for this guest. Every single individual guest is treated individually. And so now the restaurant, I think, has built a very strong advantage. But we need to do one thing more because we understand that in the restaurant industry, execution is tough. And so what we do is we now surface specific, what we call loyalty actions that instruct the staff what to do. And so those can be executed by management. They can be executed by servers, the host team. All of this is sort of built custom to the brand. But the idea might look like this. Our system says, Ryan's a very high value guest, but we're starting to see a bit less of him. Our playbook for Ryan today, because we want to retain him, is surprise and delight. So what it does then is it's instructing the staff, we're going to drop 2 glasses of Prosecco at Ryan's table. And so that sounds a little bit like this. Server walks over or manager walks over, it doesn't matter, whatever works for that brand. Say, Mr. Volberg, it's nice to see you here again today. We really value you being one of our most important guests, and we just thought we'd drop off these couple of glasses of Prosecco to start your evening off right. So our system orchestrates that for the hundreds and even thousands of guests who are invisible. But when we put our system to work, we make the invisible visible, and the results are really pretty dramatic when you're able to engage all of those guests in that highly specific way to drive retention or increase visitation. So that's really the Guestologie system in a nutshell.
Well, and I want to talk more about a little bit. You mentioned it that it was almost impossible, and I know it's not completely impossible. It was very likely hard to do without some of these advanced compute machine learning logarithms that you can now get to. Today's episode is brought to you by Restaurant Technologies Incorporated. They are the leading automation for cooking oil system out there in the market. If you're not familiar with them, they've been on the show a few times to share some of the unique and cool things they continue to do with oil management. I recently had their newly appointed CEO on the show, and they built an end-to-end closed-loop automated oil management system that delivers, monitors, filters, collects, and recycles your cooking oil. It sounds like they do a ton, but it really is a cool system that I think everybody should be considering looking at. They clean up one of the dirtiest and dangerous jobs in your kitchen. So if you haven't heard of them, I would encourage you to check them out. RTI-inc.com, or you can call them at 888-779-5314. They've helped over 50,000 customers in the United States with their cooking oil. So clearly they are doing something right. And now back to the episode. So I'd love to talk about what that unlock was there, Ryan, because I think there's people that have kind of a playbook that just says, hey, I see this guy, or, it pops up on their loyalty and now they get a free dessert or whatever else. And again, I think we've all experienced this where it's just kind of, it's generic, and the guy that potentially is spending 10% of what you're spending might be getting the same dessert just because that's what the system told them to do. Whereas I feel like you guys have had an unlock that not only is it predictive. Today's episode is brought to you by Restaurant Technologies Incorporated. They are the leaders in automated cooking oil management. And if you're not familiar with them, they've been on the show a few times to share some of the unique and cool things that they've been doing in the oil management space. They have an end-to-end closed-loop automated system that helps deliver, monitor, filter, collect, and recycle your cooking oil. Sounds like a lot. It's because they do a ton to help clean up one of the dirtiest jobs and most dangerous jobs in your kitchen. You can check them out by visiting rti-inc.com or by calling 888-779-5314. They've already helped over 45,000 customers in the United States with their cooking oil, so clearly they're doing something right. Now back to the episode. It also is very relevant to that guest and what you think and what you learn and what you grow with versus kind of the blanket emails that just says, hey, you get a free dessert. It happens to be my birthday this week. So the amount of emails that come into my mailbox from all of the loyalty programs saying, come in and get your free dessert because it's your birthday this week. And so across the board, I think that's kind of the generic way. But I feel like you guys have, through machine learning and through these ideas, you guys have unlocked something that's very different. That's, I guess just at a higher level. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, Ryan, before we keep going.
You bet. I want to talk about the SAPS model because if we think about this and we're saying, look, what are we trying to do, right? We're trying to solve that 36% churn problem where guests are coming in and they're, they're just not loyal, right? And so you actually have to pause for a second and say, well, what actually drives loyalty to a brand? Okay. So there's a model out there called SAPS, S-A-P-S, and it was created by a guy named Gabe Zickerman, who he was a really brilliant guy who figured this out. But SAPS stands for status, access, power, and stuff. And so in order, those are the things that create loyalty to a brand. So the number one thing is status. And what is status? It's how you make me feel, right? And then access, power, and then the bottom is stuff. So what is stuff? It's free things. It's a free cake on your birthday. It's points accumulation. It's discounts. It's half price red wine night. It's this, that, and the other thing. So what Gabe's work proved was that the thing that creates the most loyalty, which is status, is also the cheapest. So like restaurant people pay attention because it's like, holy shit, wait a sec. The thing that causes the most
stuff when all they need to do is acknowledge their guests, but they need to be able to do it at scale, back to your point. And without digital, it's almost impossible.
So this is why I got so excited. And I was like, I felt like I was like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I found I found the treasure, right? It was like I'd been on this quest and it was right there all the time, is that the thing that causes the most loyalty is the cheapest, but the thing that causes the least amount of loyalty is the most expensive. And it feels like, for the most part, that's where our industry operates. Is that, what do we want to do? We want to get the guests to come back. So, well, how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to go send them some cheap offer. And I think Groupon is the most,
because they can prove that they said that and the person came in. But at the end of the day, now with some of the machine learning, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's like
No, no,
now we can actually know who that guest is today if you look at the data appropriately. Whereas 20 years
exactly.
ago, everybody's still running that old playbook that says, I'm going to throw out a coupon and people are going to drive guest behavior. But at the end of the day,
Yep.
we now know who that guest is so much more often. So I apologize. I get
No, no.
passionate about it because I hate these brands that just cheapen who they are by throwing out all of these discounts. And ultimately, they get into the discount loop where people won't come back unless they have the discount.
Well,
And it's ruined more fantastic brands than any of us would ever even imagine.
well, it is. We all know it, right? And yet, but there's no system to actually do the status part. And so that's what we built. So, so to get to the machine learning piece, right? What our system is doing, and this is I'm glad you brought this up because it's an important point, is our system is saying we're going to do these things. So what are, we have monetary and non-monetary experiences that we orchestrate within the restaurant. So what are we doing? We're acting as a co-pilot very intelligently. And actually we're taking over part of that discretionary budget that all restaurants have to give away the free thing here and there. We're saying, why don't you let us allocate that with intentionality, but also with provable ROI. And so,
Mhm.
so here's what it looks like. Our system says, we're going to do a manager visit here. We're going to offer these people a premium table. There's a whole variety of like experiential, like some of our customers are just incredibly creative. Like some of the higher end places are doing things like a kitchen visit. One of my favorite actually is a choose your own steak. So if you have like a customer in our system sees what's going on and it says, you just ordered a tomahawk. Our chef would like to invite you into the kitchen so that you could pick your own steak from among the ones that we have available.
That's pretty
These are
amazing.
experiences, right? And the way to do it is they're exclusive. It's not for everybody every time. But our system today singled you out and said, we want to give this experience to you. Why? Because you're so important to us, right? And so when we've allocated, our system has said, recommended these experiences, we check off when they're done. This is an
Mhm.
incredibly important piece of it, right? So you give away the Prosecco or you do this intentional manager visit or gave them a premium table or whatever it was, you check that off. And what happens now is our system is learning and watching. So there's two things. Thing number one, we saw the guest's pattern. We intervened. We sort of changed their experience. We created this experience. Now what happened? Right? Did it change? Are they coming more often? And so our system is learning and saying, well, these are the things that are working. So it starts to do those things more. And the things that aren't working, it starts to do those things less. But the other piece is it gives us this all important attribution. And so what happens is we're able to say, look, here's what the guest behavior was before. Then we intervened. The behavior changed. What's the value of that behavior now in terms of increased revenue to your business? And so,
Yep.
the one thing I'm very proud about in terms of our business is we're able to prove to our customers the down to the penny of the additional value that we're creating. And I think that's really important because there's a lot of, I don't know, I guess there's a lot of snake oil out there. There's a lot of AI hype. There's a lot of bullshit. And what we're saying is like, don't pay us a penny if we can't prove to you that we're actually bringing you tremendous value. And our one of our lead customers right now is for every dollar they invest with us, they're getting $19 in top line revenue back. And we can prove
Yeah.
it down to the penny.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Before we dig into kind of how you guys are going about doing that and what it looks like to engage Ryan, talk to me about those guests that are kind of at the bottom of the spectrum. You talked about the elites and you talked about the VIPs, but now how do I bring a guest that's kind of in that they're an occasional guest or that maybe you've seen them once in the last 18 months or twice in the last 18 months, but I now want to create another reason for them to come in. And I'd love to talk about, because I know a lot of people are also looking to try and solve that problem too. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you guys are solving for that guest that you know a lot less about because they're not your VIP or they're not at that level.
Yeah, this is one of the areas where we've invested a lot. So we have 25 machine learning models and some of them have very specific tasks. And this is one of those tasks, which is to find signal from people that we maybe have only seen once before. So what we're able to do now with about 70 to 80% accuracy is to determine after 2 visits if a guest has the potential to be in your top 10. And so we do this by looking for patterns. And there are a great many different types of signals and patterns the system's looking for. But I'm going to give you a very simple example. And when you hear this, you'll kind of like, oh, that makes sense. So the idea looks like this. After 2 visits, you are able to see somebody who looks a lot like one of your best customers look like on their first 2 visits, right?
So you're doing the lookalike campaign, but in through the data. I love that. That makes so much more sense. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a simplification of how ML works because there's a lot more going on, but that's what's happening. So a guest visited us once, but now they're here today. And our system is looking at this and saying, based on the time of day, based on the group size, based on a whole variety of things, we're starting to see a picture. Now, it's not a precise picture, but it's a good enough picture that what we're saying is we think we should invest in this relationship and see what happens. Also, the same with guests who are like, I would say, pretty infrequent. So we have a segment that we call prospect. And within, it's about 65% of the total customer base. It's the bulk, right? And these are people who come in once or twice a year. Inside of that big segment are people who are probably, they dine out a lot, but they're just not loyal to us. And our system has gotten incredibly good at picking these people out. And I'll back that up with a number in just 1 second. So what our system's doing is it's looking inside the prospect group. And as a prospect shows up and we see them at the table, our system says, you know what? This prospect, we're going to lean into this relationship. We're going to invest because, again, we see signals that there's potential here. And so what happens is, and it's really counterintuitive because you'll have your elites and your VIPs and they get all the attention, but our system's saying, you know what, we're going to do a manager visit for this prospect, and we might even do a little appetizer or a little something. And and it's a warm feeling we're creating. The manager walks over, just say, I'm just wanting to introduce myself. It's nice to have you here. And I just wanted to drop something at your table. Wow. Now that makes a big impression. So what our system is looking at is then what was the effect that had on the behavior. And what's happening in some of our customers, actually most of our customers, is kind of an average now, is we're getting so good at it that we have a 77% increase in return rate. And so,
right, just printing money, man. It's incredible.
So like, this is the power. And again, like, I don't want to get into the AI hype stuff. A lot of this is machine learning, which is looking for patterns. And then what we do is we stick the AI on top of it, right, to sort of help bring this information, like the summary, and sort of make it digestible and personable in the dining room. But what's happening is our system said, let's not this guest, but that one over there, let's make this investment and see what happens. And so when we make that investment, like I said, we're getting so good at it now that we're about a 77% increase in terms of how fast these guests come back. So that mounts up to huge increases in revenue. So some of our customers right now are getting across the board a 3% chain-wide lift in gross revenue, which is obviously massive.
Yeah, which is huge.
I'll give you another stat. When we did some analysis for a customer, what was happening is we pulled in all their data and we did a segmentation, and we showed them and said, you are losing 18% of the revenue from your elite tier. And they freaked out, right? They were like, what do you mean? Like, we're really good. And I'm like, you are really good, but this is the math, right? It's what it is. And so they actually had their own data scientists go in and look at the data. And she came back and said, they're right, that this is what's happening. It's an 18% loss in this revenue. And when we put our system in, within 4 weeks, we broke away from the control group. And after about 12 weeks, we had 101% revenue retention from the elite group.
Oh my gosh. That's huge.
So like, I know people maybe listening to this is like, what are you, Ryan's from Vancouver on the West Coast. He's probably smoking something, but it's actually super simple, like in the concept, which was once you put our system in, what was happening is these elites, first of all, we have the segmentation that identifies an elite. This is not a tag in Open Table that says VIP. This is the math. It's frequency, time spent into a pretty advanced segmentation model that basically says, these are who your elites actually are. And then what our system is doing is when they're in the restaurant, we're surfacing that. And then we're acting as a co-pilot to help the staff identify them and then to engage with them. So what was happening was they weren't getting missed. Each elite was being, sort of seen and valued every time they showed up. And so what happened is we didn't get that 18% churn. They just kept coming. Why? Because it felt good, right? And that's status, how you make me feel, right? So, I think that's really the core mechanics of this. What we figured out is how to do this at scale and execute it in the dining room in a chaotic environment with servers and managers who are super busy. It's like, how do we make all this work operationally? And that's what we figured out.
Well, and the funny thing is I think we've all experienced this in a positive way when we're in a dining room with a guest focused staff that knows who you are, but you can't do it at scale. And that's the part that I think you've really unlocked. So Ryan, talk to me. How do people engage they've sat through 35 minutes of us, talking about restaurant tech and what you guys are solving for. What does engagement look like? How can they learn more? How can they stay in tune? How can they decide if this is something that you would be willing to put it into their brand and figure out if it makes sense for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about like why we're doing this, right? Like I've said, I think if you look back at my career, I've always and I think it goes back to the fact that I did dishes at my dad's restaurants. I've grown up in this industry. I don't think it's any surprise that I've dedicated my entire career to sort of coming up with tools that help restaurants succeed. So our motivation is very important to me and to our staff and our team, which is we want to help restaurants be successful. We want to build stronger relationships between restaurants and their guests. Why do I bring this up? I think it's because it's not obvious that is the case out there in general. And I don't want to vilify anyone at all, but there are platforms out there that I think are competing for the guest relationship. And so, and it doesn't make them bad, right? Like they're running their business and they're doing their thing. But what we're trying to say here is like our motivation is that we want to help restaurants build deep and lasting relationships with their guests. So like if that resonates with you, then we should talk, because we just happen to have some technology that does it. But the technology is like the second piece, right? The why is because I don't think restaurants who can't recognize their elites when they walk in the door, who can't personalize service between, Ryan, who's been here 50 times, and someone who's here 2 or 3 times, but is showing signs of like maybe falling in love with the brand. And we would really want to invest in that. They're all very different journeys. And our system has the ability to pick that out. And so, if this makes sense to you and you want to have a chat, go to guestologie.com, guestologie.com. I'm sure it'll be in your show notes. Or you can reach out to me directly. It's just Ryan@guestologie.com. We would just love to chat with you. We're not a high pressure outfit. We want to have a conversation about what you're doing. And if it fits, it fits. We love to do pilots and prove, exactly the results that we can generate. We're really starting to pick up a lot of momentum right now, which is great. But we've said no to a few brands that we didn't necessarily think were right for us. So, we just want to work with, I think, really phenomenal operators that care about their customers and build some magic together. That's what we want to do.
I love it. And I know longtime listeners know this. Part of why the podcast exists is because I am passionate about watching restaurants succeed. I watch too many restaurants do some really dumb stuff. And so bringing people on like yourself and others that have just really changed the restaurant industry to help us to serve the guests that we need to serve the staff members and give them the tools to be successful is what I'm passionate about, and part of why I think you and I resonate so well with each other, Ryan, when I continue to talk with you. And if I haven't already said it to you, thank you for creating this, because I do really think it's an opportunity to change the story that's going on within the restaurant industry. So for our listeners, guys, go check out guestologie.com. It'll be in the show notes. If you guys want to know a little bit more, hit me up. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, please do so, and make it a great day.